The gift I gave my daughter for her wedding cost $11,000. It was the down payment on her first house, money I'd saved for 19 years, one overtime shift at a time. 4 months after the wedding, I stood in her driveway and watched her husband tell a yard full of neighbors that old men who can't let go of their money usually end up alone. Nobody laughed. Everyone looked at their shoes. And I want to tell you something strange. I didn't say a word back. I just smiled, walked to my truck, and drove to a lawyer's office the very next morning. What happened after that took 4 months to finish. And by the end of it, the man who mocked me was the one standing in a living room full of family, begging me not to sign the last page. If you've ever given everything to somebody and watched them decide you were still worth less than nothing, then friend, this story is for you. But before we get into it, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and tell me down in the comments what state you're watching from tonight. Alright? Let me tell you how a man my age ends up sitting across from a lawyer instead of at his own daughter's dinner table. My name is Frank Delgado. I'm 66 years old, and for 31 years I worked the line at a sheet metal plant outside Toledo, Ohio, running the same stamping press, until my hands learned every sound that machine could make, good or bad. I retired 4 years ago with a fused disc in my lower back, hearing that isn't what it used to be, and a pension that took 3 decades to earn and about 10 minutes to explain to anybody who asks. I live in a small house on Delverne Street, the same one my late wife Carol and I bought in 1989 when the paint was peeling and the plumbing was older than both of us combined. She's the one who planted the 2 crabapple trees out front. I'm the one who put a new roof on it myself, one weekend at a time, because we couldn't afford to hire it done and I was too stubborn to ask anybody for help. The garden shed in back, I built that with lumber I salvaged from a job site that was tearing down an old barn. Nothing in that house came easy, and maybe that's exactly why I never once took a single board of it for granted. Carol passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from the day they found it to the night I held her hand in a hospital bed and felt the room go quiet in a way no room had ever gone quiet before. After that, Sunday dinners became the thing that kept me tethered to something. Same kitchen table, same chipped blue plates she picked out at a flea market in 1994. Same recipe box with her handwriting fading a little more every year. She wrote her pot roast recipe on an index card, and at the bottom in pencil it says, "Don't rush the onions, Frank," because apparently I always rush the onions. I still don't rush them. Grief's a strange passenger. It doesn't ride in the back seat quietly. It sits right up front with you, and some days it even reaches over and grabs the wheel. Some of you know exactly the kind of passenger I mean. My daughter Nicole is 29. She's a dental hygienist, sharp as anything, the kind of kid who used to sit at that kitchen table doing homework while I made dinner, asking me 100 questions a minute about everything from carburetors to why the sky was blue. She used to call me every single Sunday, rain or shine, just to talk about nothing in particular. Somewhere in the last 2 years, that call started coming less and less, and I told myself it was just marriage, just being busy, just life doing what life does. Her husband is Tyler Mercer, 33 years old, works in what he calls wealth strategy, though nobody in the family has ever gotten a straight answer about what that actually means day to day. He drives a truck that costs more than my house did when I bought it. He wears sunglasses indoors sometimes, which I never understood, and he has a way of talking to older folks like he's doing them a favor, just by making eye contact. I never held any of that against him at first. A young man wants nice things, fine, that's between him and his bank account. What bothered me, slowly, over time, was the way he talked about people who had less than him, especially people my age. "Frank, you really ought to get one of those smart hearing aids," he'd say, laughing a little, "the ones that connect to your phone. You still driving that old truck? I could get you into something nicer for less than you'd think." "My tools still work fine," I'd tell him. He'd smile like I'd said something cute. Everyone at the table would chuckle along politely, and Nicole would squeeze my arm afterward and whisper, "Dad, he's just teasing." Maybe. But teasing stops being teasing when it's always aimed at the same man, and it never once lands on the fella telling the joke. I let it go, year after year, for 2 reasons. Because I loved my daughter more than I loved my pride. And because in her last month, Carol made me promise I'd never let bitterness sour our family table. I kept that promise a lot longer than maybe I should have. Nicole and Tyler's wedding was 2 years ago, out at a vineyard 40 minutes from here that cost more than I made in a full year on the line. I gave them $11,000 toward their first house as a wedding gift, Money I'd been setting aside since Nicole was 10 years old. Back when I started a little envelope in my sock drawer labeled "Someday." I never told her how long I'd been saving it. I didn't want her carrying that weight. I just wanted her to have a door of her own to walk through without starting a hole in debt. Carol and I used to talk about that envelope on quiet nights, imagining the day we'd hand it over. I got to do it alone, and I did it with a smile, because some promises you keep even after the person you made them with is gone. 4 months ago, Tyler's company had what he called a milestone cookout at the house Nicole and I helped him afford, and half the neighborhood was invited. I came because Nicole asked me to, wearing my good shirt, bringing a cooler of the beer Tyler likes even though I don't much care for it myself. The afternoon started fine. Kids running through sprinklers, somebody's dog stealing hot dogs off a paper plate, the smell of charcoal drifting over fences. I was standing near the grill talking to one of Tyler's coworkers about the Buckeyes when Tyler came over, drink in hand, already a little loud from a few beers, and clapped a hand on my shoulder in front of everybody. "You know," he said, loud enough for 6 or 7 people to hear, "my father-in-law here basically funded this whole backyard. 11 grand, just like that." Some laughter, awkward, uncertain. I smiled, waiting for it to pass, the way I'd waited 100 times before. Then he kept going. "Funny thing about guys Frank's age," he said, still grinning. "They save every dime their whole lives, and then they can't even enjoy it. Can't let go of a nickel. Guess that's what happens when you spend 30 years punching a clock instead of building something real." A few people laughed nervously. Nobody defended me. I felt my face go hot, in a way it hadn't in years, and for one long second, my first instinct, and I promise you, this is the honest, embarrassing truth, was to laugh along with him, to make it easier on everybody else in that yard. Think about that for a second. A man mocks the money that put a roof over his own head, and my first reflex was to smooth it over so the party wouldn't feel tense. That's what 3 decades of keeping the peace does to you. It rewires the alarm system in your chest until it stops going off even when it should be screaming. I didn't say anything. I just set my beer down on the patio table, told Nicole I had a headache, and drove home in silence with the radio off. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Nicole. "Dad, are you okay? You left kind of fast." I stared at that message a long time before I typed back. "Just tired, sweetheart." I didn't tell her what her husband had said. I didn't tell her because some small, tired part of me already knew what would happen if I did that. It would somehow become my fault for being too sensitive, and I didn't have it in me that night to find out I was right. For 3 days, nobody called to check on me beyond that one text. What I got instead on the 4th day was Nicole stopping by unannounced, and I want to tell you about that visit because it's the moment everything actually started. She came in with 2 coffees like old times, sat at the kitchen table, and after some small talk about her patients and my garden, she said, kind of careful, kind of rehearsed, "Dad, have you ever thought about what happens to this house down the road?" I told her I planned on dying in it, which was mostly a joke, except it wasn't, not really. She laughed too quickly and said, "Tyler and I were just talking, and with your knee and the stairs, and living alone now, maybe it's worth thinking about putting the house in some kind of trust with us on it, just so things are simple someday." I set my coffee down slower than I needed to. "Simple for who?" I asked. "For everybody," she said, "so there's no confusion." I told her I'd think about it, gave her nothing else, and watched a small flicker of something cross her face. Disappointment, maybe, or the look of someone who'd expected an easier conversation. Carol used to say Nicole couldn't lie to save her life. Turns out she also wasn't much good at carrying somebody else's script. That night, I sat at my kitchen table a long time, turning it over. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe she really was just worried about her old man living alone. I wanted so badly to believe that. But something in the timing gnawed at me 4 days after Tyler stood in a crowded backyard mocking the very money I'd given them. Here comes a gentle little conversation about putting my house into a trust that conveniently includes both their names. I didn't sleep much. I got up around 2 in the morning and did what I always do. When my mind's too loud to sit still, I found something to fix. The hinge on the garden shed door had been sticking since spring. I sat out there under one bare bulb with a screwdriver and a can of oil, and the whole time, the same scene kept looping behind my eyes. Tyler's hand on my shoulder, the laughter, Nicole across my kitchen table asking about the deed like she was asking about the weather. 2 days after that, my neighbor Gerald Whitfield showed up in my driveway around 4 in the afternoon. Gerald's 74, retired from the county road crew, walks a three-legged beagle named Scout twice a day, whether Scout wants to go or not. He'd known Carol and me since before Nicole was born, and he still brought over a coffee cake every couple weeks just because. That day, though, he didn't have any coffee cake. He had his hands jammed in his pockets and a look on his face like a man carrying something heavy he didn't want to set down. "You got a minute, Frank?" he asked. I put down the wrench I was holding. "For you, always," I said. He didn't smile back, which worried me, because Gerald's the kind of man who'll find something to smile about at a funeral. "Been chewing on something since that cookout," he said. I told him I had too. "No," he said. "I mean, I saw it clear as day. He put a hand on your shoulder and made you the punchline in front of half the block." I told him I knew. "That's not all," Gerald said, and something cold moved through my chest, because I could tell by his face there was more coming. "Back in June," he said, "I was out walking Scout past the end of your street, and your son-in-law was standing by his truck with two other fellas, business types, all of them laughing about something. I only caught a piece of it." "What piece?" I asked, already bracing myself. Gerald looked me dead in the eye and said, "He told them, quote, 'Once the old man can't keep up with the house anymore, that place is basically already ours.'" For a second, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. The way sound sometimes plays tricks on ears that don't work like they used to. But we were standing 3 feet apart in my own driveway, in broad daylight, and I'd heard every single word clean. I laughed once, not because any part of that was funny, but because my body simply didn't know another way to release what it was holding. That house. The house where Nicole took her first steps in the hallway. The house where I held Carol's hand for the last time, 6 years later, sitting in her favorite chair because we'd brought it home from the hospital, so she could die somewhere that smelled like us, instead of somewhere that smelled like bleach. Already itemized in another man's head. Already penciled into somebody's 5-year plan, and he was just waiting on the vacancy. That night I sat at the table with an old photo album, doing the thing you do when your chest is too full to hold still. Nicole at 7, gap-toothed, holding up a crooked Father's Day card made out of macaroni. Nicole at 17, rolling her eyes at prom pictures. Nicole and Carol in the backyard, laughing about something I've long since forgotten. Then the newer pages. Nicole and Tyler at Thanksgiving. Nicole and Tyler at Christmas, his arm slung around her shoulder, his smile aimed straight at the camera like it was rehearsed. And me, somewhere off at the edge of every frame, half-cropped, usually the one holding the phone taking the picture instead of standing in it. I ran my thumb over an old photo of Carol and asked the empty kitchen, out loud, did I miss it? I don't know exactly who I was asking. God, myself, her, maybe all three at once. Had I gotten so afraid of losing my daughter that I'd made myself smaller and smaller until I fit neatly into the corner of my own family portrait? I picked up the phone to call Nicole. My thumb actually hovered over her name for a good 10 seconds. Then I set it back down, because I realized calling her wasn't going to fix anything that mattered. I made a decision that night that had nothing to do with keeping anybody else comfortable, for the first time in longer than I could remember. I was going to pay attention, quietly, carefully. The way you listen to an engine that's about to tell you the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. Because if Tyler believed my age made me easy, he was mistaking my quiet for weak, and 31 years standing at a stamping press taught me the difference between quiet and off better than almost anything else could have. After Gerald's visit, I stopped seeing Tyler as simply rude and started seeing him as a man with a project, and I was the project. Every kind word, every offer to help me around the house, every casual mention of my knees or my age, I started hearing it differently. Not cruelty exactly. Strategy. I told nobody what I was thinking. I confronted nobody. From the outside, my life looked exactly the same as it had the week before. On the inside, I was running a diagnostic on my own family, the same way I used to run one on a press that was making a sound it shouldn't be making. The pattern surfaced fast once I started looking for it. The following Sunday, Tyler showed up to dinner carrying a bottle of wine that cost more than I usually spend on groceries in a week. The first gift he'd ever brought me in 2 years of marriage that wasn't a joke, wrapped up as a compliment. He praised my garden. He asked about my truck with what sounded almost like genuine interest. He offered to send somebody over to fix my gutters, no charge, just say the word. I told him I was handling it myself. I always have. And I caught it, the quick, flat glance he traded with Nicole across the table, the kind of married people share when a plan isn't going the way they'd rehearsed it in the car on the way over. That glance bothered me more than any joke ever had, because jokes are weather, they pass. Glances like that are climate. They tell you what's actually going on underneath. A week later, I had a standing appointment with my attorney, a man named Robert Ashcombe, who'd handled Carol's estate and had known our family for almost 20 years. I'd gone in for something routine, updating a beneficiary form after a bank merger changed some paperwork. Robert finished it up, slid the folder across the desk, then leaned back in his chair with an expression I didn't like one bit. "Frank," he said, "I've been going back and forth on whether to mention something to you." "Go ahead," I told him, my stomach already tightening. "Your son-in-law called this office a few months back," he said. "About what?" I asked. "He didn't ask about your specific file," Robert said carefully. "He asked general questions." "What kind of general?" I said. "The kind people ask," Robert said, "when they're trying to understand how things work for an aging parent." He wanted to know how a person could be found incapable of managing their own finances. He asked what happens to a house if the owner moves into assisted living, whether a trust could be set up that gave family members authority even while the original owner was still alive and well. My jaw was tight enough to crack a tooth. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "The only thing I legally could," Robert said with the faintest, tired kind of smile. "Nothing. He never said your name, not once." "He didn't have to," I said. We sat there a moment in that heavy, quiet two old men share when they've both read the same ugly page of a book neither of them wanted to open. I drove home slow that evening, not because of traffic, but because with every mile another excuse I'd been holding on to for 2 years quietly fell apart in the passenger seat beside me. Maybe he didn't mean it that way. Maybe it's just how his generation talks. Maybe Nicole doesn't know. One by one, gone. That night I stood out in my garden shed, my favorite room in the whole house, tools hanging exactly where 30 years of muscle memory expects them to be, and I picked up a framed photo from mine and Carol's 20th anniversary, the one where I'm laughing because I'd burned the burgers so bad the smoke alarm went off twice. I ran my thumb over the glass and said out loud to nobody, "They think getting older means getting easy to move." The shed didn't answer me back, but somehow, in the particular quiet of that space, I felt like she did. The next morning I called Robert before 8. "I want to make some changes," I told him. "What kind?" he asked. "The kind," I said, "that makes sure nobody in this family ever again mistakes my kindness for a signature." He was quiet a second, then said, "I'll clear my afternoon." And here's the thing that surprised me most through all of it: none of the paperwork we built together was about revenge. Robert never once treated it that way, and he asked me one question early on that reframed the whole thing in my mind. "What outcome," he asked, "lets you actually sleep at night?" And I thought about it honest and said, "I don't want to punish anybody. I just never want somebody deciding my future for me again without asking the man who has to live it." So that's what we built. Over 3 separate meetings and a session with a financial planner, Robert trusted a revocable trust with an independent, professional trustee, nobody from the family, no leverage for anybody to pull, updated medical directives, rewritten power of attorney. Every single document saying the same quiet sentence in careful legal language. Nobody steps in over Frank Delgado's life because they've decided they know better than he does. No traps, no hidden cameras, no theatrics. Just a grown man quietly locking his own doors from the inside. And I'll tell you something strange. The day I signed those papers, Tyler got smaller in my head. For the first time in months, my whole world grew back out past the edges of him. Gerald showed up one Saturday not long after with 2 coffees and a question. "You still got that Nova sitting under a tarp in your garage?" he asked. "Needs a carburetor rebuild," I told him. "There's a car show out in Perrysburg next month," he said, and shrugged the particular shrug men our age give each other when we're being careful not to crowd somebody else's grief. "Maybe it's time," he added. I almost said no, out of pure habit. Then I heard Carol, clear, as if she were standing right next to me at the sink. "You're allowed to have a hobby too, Frank." So the following month, Gerald and I stood in a gravel lot, full of old Novas and Camaros and more stories than sheet metal, drinking gas station coffee, while strangers argued about engine timing like it was a matter of national importance. Nobody there asked what I drove day to day. Nobody priced my watch or my hearing aids. A silver-haired fellow spent 20 minutes telling me about restoring a '69 Chevelle with his granddaughter, of all people, and meant every word of the invitation to stop by his shop anytime. Driving home that evening, I realized I'd laughed more in 4 hours than I had in the previous 4 months combined. The week after that, I started volunteering on Wednesday afternoons at a shop that fixes up donated cars for veterans getting back on their feet, brakes, alternators, the occasional transmission that made grown men want to weep. I came home covered in grease every Wednesday night, and somehow lighter every Thursday morning. There's a funny thing about helping strangers who never once ask about your bank account. It reminds you that you're still worth something, right at the exact moment your own family seems to have forgotten. About 5 weeks after the cookout, Nicole called. "Where have you been?" she asked, sounding almost hurt. "Out," I told her. "You've been hard to reach," she said. "Been busy," I said. "Doing what?" "Little bit of everything," I said. "Working on the car. Volunteering some." A long pause on her end. "You never told me any of that," she said. "You never asked," I said, gentle as I could manage. Silence again, but not an angry kind. A familiar kind. For 31 years I'd shaped my whole life around everybody else's schedule. Now, for the first time, they were going to have to find room in mine. One evening, not long after, without really planning to, I pulled a legal pad across my kitchen table and wrote my daughter a letter. Not an angry one, not a lawyer's letter. The true one, about her mother, about how afraid I'd been since we lost Carol, about why I'd swallowed every small insult for 2 solid years. Because somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself that standing up for my own dignity was the same thing as losing my daughter. And near the bottom, my pen wrote a line that surprised even me as I was writing it. "I never needed you to choose between your husband and your father," I wrote. "I only needed you to notice when somebody treated your father like he didn't matter." I sat and stared at that sentence a long while, because it was true, and true things carry a particular kind of weight. Then I folded the letter, sealed it, wrote her name across the front, and put it in the drawer of the hallway desk. She wasn't ready for it yet. Maybe I wasn't either. A few days after that, Gerald leaned over my fence while I was washing the truck. "You hear the latest?" he asked. "What's that?" I said. "Your son-in-law's been telling folks around the neighborhood you've been acting strange lately." Confused was the word somebody used. I actually laughed out loud at that. "That's a new one," I said. Gerald grinned, but there wasn't much humor behind it. "There's more," he said. "He's organizing some kind of family sit-down. Says he wants to clear the air." Neither one of us believed that for a second. 2 nights later, Nicole called, her voice careful, rehearsed in a way I recognized now. "Tyler wants everyone together this Saturday," she said. "Just to talk things through as a family. Will you come?" I looked out through my kitchen window at the yard, at the crabapple trees Carol planted, throwing their long evening shadows across the grass, and I noticed something I hadn't expected to feel. I wasn't dreading it. I wasn't planning on going there to defend myself, or to argue, or to audition for anybody's respect. That season of my life, I realized, was already over. "I'll be there," I told her. She let out a breath. "Thank you, Dad," she said, and then I made one more call. "Robert, I think it's time," I said. He didn't ask time for what. He just said, "I'll meet you there." Now slow down here with me, because this next part I've turned over in my mind more times than I can count, and you've earned every second of it. That Saturday came in bright and warm, the kind of afternoon that used to mean cookouts and lawn chairs and nothing more complicated than which game to watch. Instead, I drove over to Nicole and Tyler's house with Robert's sedan following behind me in my mirror, and the strangest passenger rode along with me the whole way there. Peace. A month earlier, I'd have spent that entire drive rehearsing arguments. That day, there was nothing left in me to rehearse. The truth, I was learning, doesn't need practice. Robert stepped out of his car with a slim leather folder under one arm and asked if I was ready. "Remember," he said, "we're not here to fight." "I know," I told him. "We're just done pretending." Nicole and Tyler's house sits on a quiet cul-de-sac on the edge of town, the one my $11,000 helped make possible. Inside, everyone was already gathered: Nicole, Tyler, Tyler's parents, my sister Diane, my nephew, and to my genuine surprise, Gerald, who I later learned had been specifically invited because Tyler had heard he'd witnessed the cookout and wanted him, in Tyler's own words, managed. The room went quiet the moment Robert and I stepped through the door. Tyler clocked the leather folder in Robert's hand immediately and let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You brought a lawyer," he said. I smiled politely. "I brought a man who's very good with paperwork," I said. Tyler's grin stretched wider. "Wow," he said. "Dramatic." Robert simply shook every hand in the room, calm as any ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Nicole's eyes were already searching my face. "Dad, "What is this?" she asked quietly. "I believe," I said. Tyler wanted to clear the air. "I do," Tyler announced, planting himself in front of the fireplace with his hands in his pockets, hosting his own little intervention in his own living room. "We've all been uncomfortable since the cookout," he said, scanning the room like a man counting votes. "I think Frank owes everybody here an apology. Frank, not Dad, not even Mr. Delgado. Funny how respect leaves a family one small word at a time, and you don't always notice it's gone until somebody says your first name like it's a demotion." Nobody spoke. Robert glanced at me. I gave him the smallest nod, and the folder opened. "What is that?" Tyler asked, his smile still holding barely. Robert's voice was the same level, unhurried, inevitable voice I'd heard across his desk for 2 decades. "Mr. Delgado asked me here," he said, "because certain misunderstandings have developed regarding his estate and his future." Tyler laughed once, sharp. "What estate?" he said. Robert didn't so much as look up. "Over the past several weeks," he said, "we've completed a comprehensive plan. A revocable living trust, one folder onto the coffee table. Updated medical directives, a second folder. Revised, durable power of attorney, a third. And an independent, professional trustee." The temperature in that room changed all at once. Nicole blinked hard. "You did all that?" she asked me. "I did," I said. "I didn't know," she said. "I know," I told her, gently as I could. Tyler crossed his arms. "I don't see why we need to be discussing this right now," he said. Robert looked directly at him for the first time since we'd walked in. "I think you do," Robert said. And for the first moment all afternoon, Tyler stopped smiling. Robert folded his hands together. "Some months back," he said, "a man called my office asking a number of questions." Nicole frowned. "What questions?" she asked. Robert kept his eyes locked on Tyler. "About conservatorships," he said. The word landed in that living room like a wrench dropped onto concrete. "About how an elderly homeowner might lose control of his own finances," Robert went on. "About whether moving into assisted living changes who legally owns a house." Silence, thick and complete. Nicole's head turned toward her husband, slow, like it was moving through water. "You called my father's lawyer," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Those were hypothetical," Tyler said. "Too quick, too loud." "I'm sure they were," Robert said pleasantly. "I work in wealth strategy," Tyler said, louder still. "People ask me questions like that all the time." "Plenty of people work in finance," Robert agreed. "Very few of them phone their father-in-law's personal attorney to ask how an old man loses his house." Nobody in that room breathed. Tyler's father stared down at the carpet. His mother's hands twisted in her lap. And my daughter looked at her husband the way you look at a stranger who's just peeled off a mask you didn't know he was wearing. "Why?" she whispered. Tyler threw his hands up. "You're all making this sound so much worse than it was," he said. "I was planning ahead." "For what?" Nicole said. And her voice cracked straight down the middle. "For our future," he said. And my daughter took one slow, deliberate step backward, physically away from him, and said the sentence I know I will hear in my head for the rest of my life. "My father's future," she said, "is not your retirement plan." The ceiling fan turned overhead. Nobody moved. Tyler scanned the room for backup his parents, my sister, my nephew, and found nothing waiting for him but floorboards and folded hands. And then Gerald Whitfield cleared his throat from the corner of the room, 74 years old, and steady as bedrock. "I saw what happened at that cookout," he said. Every head in the room turned toward him. That comment wasn't just teasing. "That's ridiculous," Tyler snapped. Gerald didn't raise his voice one bit. Men like Gerald never have to. "I've known Frank almost 20 years, he said, looking Tyler square in the eye. "And I heard you back in June out by your truck talking to your buddies." Tyler's face lost color by degrees, like a screen slowly dimming. "Word for word," Gerald recited. "Once the old man can't keep up with the house anymore, that place is basically already ours." "Your words, Tyler, not mine." Nicole turned back to her husband one final time, and when she spoke, her voice came out barely above a whisper. "You told me that was a joke," she said. "Everyone's blowing this way out of proportion," Tyler said. "No," she breathed. "It wasn't." And that's when I stood up, not out of anger. I wanted the whole room to hear what I had to say at a normal, conversational volume, nothing more. "I didn't come here to embarrass anybody," I said. I came because I spent 31 years standing at a machine so I could build something for my family, and because I gave every dollar I had saved so my daughter could have a front door of her own. I looked at Nicole. I wanted my retirement to be about fishing and fixing up an old car and Sunday dinners with you, I said. Instead, I found myself sitting with a lawyer, making sure I couldn't be pushed out of my own front door. Nobody interrupted. I never cared about the money you spent that night, I said, turning to Tyler. I cared that you found it funny to humiliate me in front of a yard full of strangers. And I cared even more, I said, looking around the room now, that somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that keeping the peace meant accepting disrespect. I was wrong about that. The silence that followed wasn't tense, and it wasn't awkward. It was simply honest. Maybe the first fully honest silence that family had shared in years. Robert quietly closed his folder. I believe our business here is finished, he said. Nobody stopped us at the door on the way out. Behind me, just before I stepped outside, Nicole said one word, Dad. I turned around, and my daughter stood there with what looked like 100 sentences caught in her throat, none of them able to find their way out. And then she simply started to cry. I gave her the smallest, saddest smile I had in me, and I walked out into the sunshine. In the driveway, Robert asked how I was feeling. I sat there a second, searching for the right word. Lighter, I finally said. He nodded like a man who'd heard that exact word from 100 other clients before me. That's what happens, he said, when people finally set down the things that were never really theirs to carry in the first place. I drove home with the windows down for the first time in longer than I could remember. And here's the lesson that whole afternoon taught me, the one I want you to carry out of this story even if you forget everything else. The mistake most of us make is believing boundaries are walls we build to keep people out. They're not. They're the paperwork of self-respect. And the people who get angriest about them are always, without fail, the ones who had plans for your open door. Life didn't turn to sunshine and easy mornings after that meeting. Real life never does. I still woke up at 5:30 out of habit. My knee still complained on the porch steps. Carol's chair still sat empty at the kitchen table where it always had. Some things don't heal just because you finally told the truth out loud. 3 days later, Nicole called. I let it ring through, not out of any kind of punishment. I just didn't have the words in me yet. I went out and mowed the lawn instead. A week after that, she knocked on my door. She looked worn thin, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back too fast, no armor left on her at all. She looked, honestly, like the little girl who used to come home swallowing tears after losing a softball game. Can I come in? She asked. Of course, I told her, and put the coffee on. She sat down in Carol's chair without thinking about it, then froze halfway through the motion. I'm sorry, she said. It's all right, I told her, and I meant it. We didn't touch our coffee for a good 5 minutes. Then she said, I didn't know, Dad. I believe you, I told her, and I watched her gather up the courage to be braver than that first sentence. But that's not the whole truth, she said, staring down into her cup. I heard the little comments over the years. I saw the way he talked to you sometimes. I just kept telling myself they were small. They were small, I said softly. One at a time. She looked up at me. But together, I said, they were a direction. Her eyes filled up. I should have said something years ago, she whispered. And I reached over and put my hand on top of hers on that old kitchen table and told her the truest thing I had in me. You loved your husband, I said. I still do, she whispered. I know, I told her. And I love you. I know that too, she said, and cried the particular quiet kind of crying that comes from finally setting down a weight you'd been carrying so long you forgot it was heavy. When she left that day, she hugged me harder than she had in years, and I let myself hope, just a little, that we'd turned some kind of corner. We hadn't. Not yet. 2 weeks after that, she came back angry, not at me exactly, angry at the whole wreckage of it. Tyler says everyone ganged up on him, she said. I nodded and let her keep going. He says Gerald exaggerated what he heard. I see, I said. He says your lawyer ambushed him in his own living room. I said nothing to that one, and then she finally asked the question she'd actually driven over to ask. Can't we all just move past this? She said. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. Then I got up, walked to the hallway desk, opened the drawer, and took out the envelope with her name written across the front. I wrote you this, I said. She reached for it, and I gently drew it back before she could take it. Not yet, I said. Her face fell. Dad, why not? She asked. Because you're not ready for it yet, I said. And because right now, sweetheart, you're still spending all your energy trying to manage everybody else's pain except your own. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know what to do, she admitted. You don't have to figure it out today, I told her. She hugged me at the door on her way out. Neither one of us said his name once, the whole visit. Another month rolled by. Summer eased into fall. The crabapple trees dropped their leaves across the yard in red and gold. Wednesdays still belonged to the veterans' garage. Saturdays still belonged to Gerald and coffee, or a car show somewhere out past the county line. And for the first time since Carol died, I noticed I wasn't just passing my days anymore. I was spending them. Then, one cool October afternoon, a third knock came at my door. Nicole stood on the porch alone, and something in her face had settled calmer, older somehow, cleaner, the way a room looks after you've finally cleared it out. She sat down at the table and said 2 words. I left, she said. I didn't press her for details. She gave me the one that mattered most anyway. I asked him one question, she said. I asked if he'd have treated you that way if Mom were still alive to see it. She gave me the saddest little smile I'd ever seen on her face. He couldn't answer me, Dad, she said. Not one single word. I closed my eyes for a second, mostly for Carol. And then Nicole said the sentence that told me my daughter had finally made her way all the way back to me. I spent 2 years calling it keeping the peace, she said. But really what I was doing was asking you to carry all of it by yourself. And then she stood up, walked over to my refrigerator, and pulled out a package wrapped in butcher paper. 2 pork chops, thick cut, the good kind. I stopped by the market on the way over, she said. Planning on making dinner? I asked. If you'll let me help, she said. And for the first time since her mother passed, somebody stood beside me at that stove instead of just waiting at the table for a plate to be set down in front of them. The pan crackled. The kitchen filled up with a smell I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Nicole reached into the recipe box on the counter and pulled out Carol's old index card, squinting at the faded pencil at the bottom. Don't rush the onions, she read out loud, and laughed. Your mother would be proud of you right now, I said, and my voice didn't hold quite as steady as I wanted it to. She laughed again, through tears this time. I finally understand why these Sunday dinners mattered so much to you, she said. So do I told her, now more than ever. When dinner was ready, Nicole carried my plate out to the table herself, both hands, careful the whole way, and set it down in front of me, looked me right in the eye, and said 6 words. Eat it while it's hot, Dad. I don't think she'll ever fully understand the size of that sentence. Months earlier, somebody had knocked the value of my whole life down to a joke in front of a yard full of strangers. Now my own daughter was standing guard over my dinner plate like it was something sacred. No speech, no ceremony, just plain respect, served warm. Sometimes that's the whole banquet, right there. She and Tyler finalized the divorce quietly the following spring. No courtroom theatrics, no celebration on my end, not even close. Honestly, I felt more grief in that moment than anything close to victory. No father dreams of watching his daughter's marriage come apart, no matter what the man did to deserve it. But I'd learned something in those months that I don't think I can ever unlearn now. A family cannot survive on respect that only flows in one direction. These days, Sunday dinner still happens at my kitchen table. The guest list is shorter than it used to be. Most weeks, it's just Nicole and me. Some weeks, Gerald wanders over with a pie he swears he bought 2 of by accident. A couple of the veterans from the garage stop by after church sometimes, still smelling faintly of motor oil no matter how hard they scrub. The table's not as full as it once was, back when Carol was still setting it. But the laughter around it is real now, and nobody sitting there is performing for anybody else. Every so often I catch myself glancing out toward the driveway, remembering that afternoon in the sun, the leather folder opening on the coffee table, my daughter's voice cracking down the middle. The $11,000 is long gone, spent the way it was always meant to be spent, and I've never once regretted giving it. What stayed with me wasn't the money at all. It was everything I finally came to understand after it was gone. I used to believe that protecting my family meant absorbing whatever they decided to hand me, no questions asked. I don't believe that anymore. Getting older doesn't make a man worth less. It just means you've finally logged enough miles on the odometer to tell the difference between love and obligation. And once you can finally tell those two apart, friend, I promise you, the whole road ahead gets a little bit lighter. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually go do this week, and it won't cost you a single dime. The next time somebody makes you the punchline one time too many, say one calm sentence back to them, out loud, no anger in it at all. That one landed on me, not with me. Just the facts, nothing more. You'll learn everything you need to know about that person from whatever happens next. And here's the question I want to leave sitting on your table tonight. The same one I chewed on for 2 solid years before I finally had my answer. How much of what you've been calling keeping the peace is really just you keeping quiet? Now it's your turn, because I've second-guessed that afternoon in the living room more times than I can count. Put a 1 in the comments if you think I did exactly right, walking in there with a folder full of paperwork instead of a raised voice. Put a 2 if you think I should have said something the very night of that cookout instead of letting it simmer for months. Put a 3 if you think 2 years of swallowed comments was the real mistake, long before any of the rest of it happened. Some nights, I'll be honest with you, I'd vote 3 myself. Tell me what state you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. It still amazes me, every single time, how far a story like this one can travel from one little kitchen in Ohio. And if you've ever been the one at the table everyone thinks it's fine to joke about, or the parent whose kids forgot to ask if you were really okay, tell me about it down below. Somebody watching this tonight is rehearsing an apology for something that was never their fault to begin with, and they need to hear from somebody who's been there that they're allowed to set it down. If this story meant something to you tonight, go ahead and subscribe and stick around a while. I've got a lifetime of these still left to tell, and this little corner of the internet only stays lit because folks like you keep coming back to it. Thank you truly for sitting with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one.